welcome to the To Be Redefined podcast. I am Cambry, this is Jenna. We're happy to be talking here today. And so to start, Jenna, how was your week? How are things going?
It was good. It was actually a really fun week. It was my birthday and my wedding anniversary. And fall is like my most favorite time of year. So, yeah, hence all of my Halloween vibes that I bring. But yeah, so it was really fun. I did a lot of like just kind of going on walks and going out to dinner to celebrate and just spending time with some friends and family and stuff. So it was really fun. How was your week?
It was good. So my fiance's birthday was yesterday.
Aww.
And, yeah, so I got to celebrate your birthday last week, and then we went to Meow Wolf.
Oh my gosh, how was it?
It was interesting.
I've never been. I like kind of wanted to try it, but
I think everyone should go at least once. Like, it is an interesting experience, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'd go again. Like, me and Luke, we kind of agreed on that it was just...
like not your favorite.
Yeah, like, and I'm not a person who's like super into art, especially not like
Super
eccentric,
trippy,
odd,
like,
yeah. And
yeah.
I mean, there were parts of it that it just like, it felt like you were on LSD or something like that.
I mean, that's like the whole point.
Yeah, it's just, and so
yeah,
there's kind of like a storyline behind it, behind the like whole thing. I'm pretty sure that's what Luke was saying, at least. Like, apparently there's like a bunch of different locations that are like around the states, and I don't think I'll be going to the rest of them, but
fair enough.
I mean, we had a good time, and then we got Raising Cane's.
Ooh, I love cane sauce.
Cane sauce.
That's like up there with Chick-fil-A sauce.
Oh my gosh. And then we got stuck in traffic, so we were just like hanging out. And I mean, yeah, the traffic part sucked, but I mean, we were just able to like talk and enjoy his birthday, and so
Nice.
I was happy about it, and it was really good. So,
Good.
So yeah.
That sounds like a fun week. So today we have a very important topic. We are talking about victimhood today. And it's important because I think, it's very popular in our society to be a victim and to kind of, your whole life is kind of defined by the things that have been done to you or the things that you've done in your past. And so I think it's kind of the key to changing the narrative that you tell yourself, and it's the key to moving forward and making progress. And I think it's probably one of the biggest pieces of healing from trauma and from difficult things in your past. And so today, we're gonna kind of talk about it, why it's important to not be a victim, and we're also gonna obviously talk about some of our personal experiences and things like we always do. And I may say some things that y'all might not love to hear in the moment, but if you stick with me, I promise that you will get something good out of it if you just put some emotions aside for the moment, because I know it's kind of a touchy subject for a lot of people, especially when we're dealing with people's past hurts and situations. So if you guys can just bear with me and just kind of listen to the end, and we'll wrap everything up and it'll make more sense, and hopefully you guys can get something good out of it. So, like I said, I feel like it's definitely an important topic, and I think it's definitely very popular to be a victim, and everyone wants to share their backstory, which is fine, but our life is not meant to stay where it's at, and we're not meant to stay as hurt victims. We're meant to heal and overcome and become victors.
Yes.
So why do you think it's so popular, I guess, or easy to fall into being a victim?
I think just because you don't have to do any kind of work. And I mean, I say that, and like when we're talking about victims of like trauma and abuse, like that can be like really hard to hear, and I don't mean it to be in any kind of like hurtful way, that what happened in the past doesn't matter or anything, because I mean, I was abused growing up. And
so was I.
Yeah.
You know, we've both been through.
Yeah, exactly.
Things, yeah.
And I think it's really important to know that it's okay that you were a victim. It's okay that you are recognizing that someone did things that were wrong to you. We're not saying that like you shouldn't admit those things, because you should.
Yeah.
I think the hard part is that once you get to a place where you are outside of that trauma, you're not undergoing it like all the time, it can be easy to be like, oh well, it was that person's fault. And now it continues to be their fault. Like my decisions, the feelings that I have, the steps that I take, they all trace back to that person. And I think it's just easier to do that. And I remember doing that myself for many, many years, where I was just like, well, this happened to me and that's why I'm reacting this way. And that's just much easier to do, because it's much easier to place all the blame on someone else instead of taking any kind of accountability and responsibility for your own life and for the things that you want to do next. I think it's just easier to not do any of the work and just kind of stay there.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I was definitely stuck in that place for a while myself, even after leaving, an abusive situation. I kind of continued to drag myself through that and continued to identify with that so heavily. And it kind of turned into like, every decision that I make is because this was done to me, and I'm an abused person, and so that means, and I'm a traumatized, like damaged person, and that's why I make these decisions. And if anyone dared to question that,
you can always revert back to like, oh well, this happened to me. So
and
it's
you
nice
can't say anything about it, because
Yeah.
you never experienced that, you never lived that, so what do you know, basically?
Yeah.
And it's really easy to be defensive, and it's honestly hard for people to argue with you on that, because they didn't like go through what you went through. But I definitely think it's popular because, like you said, like you kind of can just get a free pass in a sense to never take accountability for any of your own choices or actions, and the way that your life ends up, good or bad, is not because of you, it's because of someone else, and the effects of what they did. So I think it's just it's really easy, and it requires no self-reflection like we've talked about. It requires no work at all. So I think, and I think in the moment it doesn't feel like the easy choice, because you are feeling pain. Like when you're a victim, you are stuck in your pain, and a lot of the time you're miserable. So I'm not saying it's easy in the sense that it's like, oh, my life is easy and I can just blame everything on other people. Like you feel that pain, but it's a lot of the time because you choose to continue to drag yourself through it, and hold yourself back from healing. So I definitely think, that's why it's so popular. I really think it's just the easy choice, and everybody wants to feel validated too. And that's completely understandable. Like when you've been through something hard, you want people to understand that and to sympathize and empathize with you.
And I think that there's a very real sense in which it feels a lot safer to continue being a victim, because for a lot of people it's all that they've ever known, and so to just change things up and start like trying to make decisions for themselves and that don't lead back to someone who did them wrong, I think that is hard to do. And I think it's much easier to just be like, well, I'm going to keep on self-sabotaging and not making a difference for myself because that person did this.
Right.
And I do feel like there's a sense in which it feels safer to do that, even when it can be damaging in the long run.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's such a thing as neural pathways where if you think or feel or experience something over and over again, your brain gets kind of used to it, and it's really easy to fall back into those patterns. And I know for myself, I had a lot of hard times working through that, where when you grow up in a chaotic, traumatic environment, your brain kind of gets wired that way to like crave that in a sense, which sounds crazy because it's not a good experience, but
It's so true though.
like your brain finds a way to always get back to that place where you like crave chaos, and so you start to create it, like subconsciously you create it. It's like that's something in my own life where if things are going a little too good,
I'm going to ruin
something
it all.
something ain't right. Like I gotta go create something, which it's all subconscious, like you don't consciously make the choice, but then all of a sudden you're picking fights with people, or you're running your relationships, or you're having negative self-talk, and you spiral into like self-hatred, or like there's so many different ways you can go with that. But I definitely think that's super easy. It's easier to stick with what you know than to try something new. So definitely. So was there for you ever a period of time, once you kind of left your family, your mom's house, like your family situation, your childhood situation, where you felt like you were stuck in being a victim? And like, I guess, kind of how did that go for you? Like, what moment did you realize that you need to start taking accountability for yourself? And yeah, just kind of like, what did that journey look like for you, I guess?
Yeah, so I mean, immediately after moving out of my mom's house, like that's when it just like set in. And I think that part of it was that it became very clear to me that I had been abused. And I think that everyone who has gone through anything, they have to like come to that point or that realization where, I mean, you do have the first step towards healing is admitting that something bad did happen. But I don't think that I necessarily had the capacity at that time to heal correctly. And so what I started doing is like, I had the idea that, you know, I could blame my mom for all of my problems while I was living with her and like interacting with her. But then like after that, like I needed an excuse for my behavior kind of thing. And so I started just like taking it out on other people, and I would just like blame other people and like even friends and other family members for how I was feeling at any given time. And it was just like, well, you didn't comfort me in the way that like I wanted you to, and so I'm going to be like upset with you and like snippy and stuff like that. And that continued for like, I want to say like a year and a half, where I just like, I was miserable, like you had said earlier, and I had no joy in life. And I mean, I was going to therapy and everything, but that wasn't, the problem with therapy is that it's only as good as the time and effort that you put into it.
Right, it's a two-way street. Like you have to invest in it.
Yeah, and too. What I wanted was for someone to tell me like, oh, like none of this is your fault. Like even your behavior, it's not your fault. Like the way that you treat people. But no one was telling me that, and so I was like getting irritated with everyone who didn't tell me that, you know. And it took a friend coming to me and being like, you know, it really seems like you don't want to get better. And I was just like, what? How could you say that to me? You know, just like so offended and affronted. But then like I like took a step back because that forced me to, and I was just like, do I want to get better? Like
you really had to take a look at yourself.
Or am I instead content and just fine with forever being a victim? And it took a little while longer, but then I actually started making steps with like my depression and self-harm and everything, because I recognized that I was making things worse for myself. It wasn't my mom, it wasn't my friends, it wasn't other family members, it wasn't other people who had done me wrong. Like I was the one who was holding myself back. And I mean, that changed everything, because it was like I was constantly putting power and control into other people's actions and other people's words that they said to me or how they thought of me, instead of having responsibility for myself and just being like, you know, what does it actually take to change my life? What does it take to work towards mental health instead of walking towards mental illness? And And none of those things happened overnight. Like, it took, like, step after step and, like, walking the wrong way and then going back the other way.
Yeah,
But
2 steps forward, 1 step back.
yeah, and I mean, going back to a previous episode of just, like, being honest with yourself. Like, it first did take someone else just being like, you know, it doesn't seem like you are trying very hard and, like, desiring to get better.
Yeah.
And that was very brutally honest. Like, I did not want to hear that at that time.
I'm sure it's not fun to hear.
Yeah, but
in the
it's
moment.
exactly what I needed. I needed for someone to say, like, you know, you are the one who's making yourself miserable right now. Which means that I was also the one who was capable of making a difference in my life.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I started to walk out of victimhood and into just ownership of my life and my experiences, because I was abused growing up, and that is always going to be a part of my story. But it doesn't have to continue to influence my day-to-day life.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, if you need to go to therapy or get on medication or do whatever you need to do to get better, but you have to make the choice to do that. And for the longest time, I just wasn't doing that. And then I was confronted with all of it, and then I started to make just healthier decisions because I wasn't walking in victimhood anymore. So
that's great. Yeah. Well, and I want to go back to, like, what you had said about your, like, when you were talking with your therapist, and you know, you wanted to hear, like, none of this is your fault. And I think that's definitely something that we all want to hear. Like, if you're abused, and I will say, like, it was not your fault. Like, that is part of acceptance, is understanding what was done to you, understanding that that was not an okay thing, and realizing it wasn't your fault. There's no justification that you didn't deserve that. That person should not have done that to you. And everything. So I think there's a part of it that I think the very beginning starts with having compassion for yourself. Absolutely. And for your younger self or whatever that went through all of those things, and kind of looking at yourself as a little girl or little kid and being like, you know, just kind of mentally giving yourself a big hug and just saying, like, you know, that was not cool. Like, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And the people in your life, you know, the good people in your life that love and care about you, I'm sure will say those things too. Like, you know, you didn't deserve that. You are loved. All of those things. But at a certain point, you can only hear that so many times, and it eventually kind of doesn't help. Like, having empathy for yourself, sympathy for yourself, and other people having sympathy for you, it feels really nice. Yeah. And it's needed, I think, to a certain extent. So it is okay to take a short period of time where you kind of reflect inward and can kind of just realize that, you know, that wasn't okay. And then you have to start making a shift in your mindset to being like, okay, when that abuse stopped, the moment I left that situation, the choices that I make are now my choices. Right. And they're now my responsibility. Now, is it fair that you have all of this stuff to deal with in your life, picking up the pieces of your life? No, it's not fair. But it will never be fair, and that's something that you kind of just have to move to a place of accepting. This is what happened. There's nothing I can do to change it. It sucks, but it's where we're at, and it is what it is, kind of thing. And then you have to say, okay, do I value myself enough to change and to start taking the steps in the right direction to heal and to grow? Like, because it's not loving to yourself or to your inner child or whatever you want to focus on. It's not loving to yourself to continually be stuck in the mindset of like, well, this isn't fair. This isn't my fault. Like, this was done to me and I didn't deserve this. And while that's true, the second that the abuse ended is the second that it's now your choice and your responsibility to move forward and stop perpetuating your own pain. And I definitely think that, I definitely didn't do that for a while. Like, I was definitely stuck in victimhood for a couple of years after leaving my situation. But yeah, it's kind of similar to what you were saying. Like, I think it's really easy to, when you're in the moment, you have something to blame your problems on, because you're being abused, obviously, or in a bad situation. So it's really easy to be like, well, I'm acting this way because of this. So I got married, and then realized that my problems still existed, and I still was not doing well and not being the best person to those in my life. And I no longer had anything to blame it on, even though I tried, and I tried to continue to blame it on my past and the fact that I was mistreated. And similar to you, it took someone, my husband, kind of calling me out on it and being like, look, you don't want to go to the gym, you don't want to get out of bed, you don't want to take care of yourself, you don't want to eat good food, like, you're basically just stuck in a rut, and you're choosing to be there, and you cannot spend the rest of your life blaming everything on your parents and blaming all of your problems and never taking any ownership of anything. And I fought that, you know, similar to what we were talking about before, where I was like, you know,
sucks to hear that.
right. Well, and I was like, well, you were not in my situation. You don't know what it was like growing up the way I grew up, like, so you can't really say anything about it. And, you know, I kind of had to realize, like, there are certain things that are just universal principles of life that no matter your situation, they still apply to you. And this is one of those things. Like, at a certain point, I just had to kind of, this is bad, I'm very stubborn, and I learned the hard way, and I insist on learning the hard way at all times, and so I did that for like the first couple years of our marriage, of just like not listening to him, and I'm just gonna do it my way, and you don't understand. And then I would 6 months later come back to him and be like, you know, that thing you told me, you were right, my bad. And so, like, I think, yeah, it's hard to trust people when they're telling you things that you don't want to hear, but and
it can feel like when someone is healthier than you and you're just not, it can feel like an attack.
Yes, and like frustrating.
Like there's no way that it could be that simple.
Yes, we think it's so complicated. Yeah, definitely. And I think coming from where we've come from, like, we've been through similar things to what maybe some of you have been through, but again, it's kind of a universal principle of life. And we're saying this from a place of caring about all of you and loving all of you, and just knowing the pain that we had and that we've gone through, and just if we can kind of like save you some of that pain of being stuck in that place, then we would love to.
Because I think that the lie that victimhood offers is that somehow you're going to stop reliving the pain by being consoled enough, basically.
Yes, and
but it's just
never
like,
enough for you.
No, yeah, and it keeps on hurting, and it ends up being that, it's not that my mom continued to abuse me once I cut off contact with her, it's that I was allowing her to still have control and power over my life by continuing to be like, well, she did this, and it's just, and I just kept on I was hurting myself by perpetuating those ideas and thoughts that, like, nothing was going to change, it was never going to get better because my mom did this and stuff like that. And so then I was just denying myself any opportunity for a healthy life.
Right.
And
when you're holding yourself, when you do that to yourself, you're holding yourself in a place of powerlessness. Like, you are not empowering yourself at all. Like, you are just saying, this is all I'm worth, what that person did to me and how they treated me, they must be right, because that's all I'm worth, and I'm just going to continue to keep myself reliving that over and over again, and holding myself in this place of just hurt and never getting better.
Yeah, and it's just like, well, why would you give anyone that power?
Right,
And that's something that is very clear to me now, but I understand that, like, when I was stuck in victimhood, I didn't see it that way. I thought that it was actually getting back at my mom by being so miserable, because it was like, well, you ruined my life, so this is what you get, basically. But it wasn't hurting her because she didn't know about it.
It was only hurting you.
Yeah, and it was damaging me, but also the people that I loved and wanted to be around, and so yeah, it is interesting, because I do feel like our culture has bought into a lie that, it's better to be a victim. You're going to have more chances and opportunities if you're a victim. But it's actually the opposite, that like you are shutting yourself down at each moment. And instead, you could have control over all of your life, Not like that you are some mastermind or anything, but
but you have more control over your outcome of your life than you think you do.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's something that's important to know and remember.
For sure.
Yeah. And then I guess, I would say we're kind of like a work in progress, obviously, but we're kind of a positive outcome of like we've come through a lot of things and healed a lot from things. Do you have any people that you've observed, and like you don't need to name names or anything, but that you kind of saw the negative outcome of never letting go of like your victimhood and your bitterness and things like that? And like have you learned from like what you don't want to be, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, I've definitely had some friends who they're the type to complain about all the things going wrong in their life, but they're not willing to do anything to change it. And I've seen a lot of other people like make good and healthy suggestions to them, but they just don't make any kind of positive change in their own life. I think that goes back to what we were saying at the start, was that it's comfortable being a victim. It's just like, if it's what you know, it's what you're familiar with, it makes sense that you would continue in it, Yeah, and that doesn't like, justify it, but it makes sense.
For sure. And I think it's like a natural thing. Like sometimes we don't even realize when we're slipping into it. You kind of spiral down and you don't realize that you're being so negative. You don't realize you're blaming other people. And so I think obviously the first step to changing anything is awareness. So I think sometimes people don't understand or realize, but it definitely, if it's what you know, it's easy to stay in that.
Yeah, and I think that's why talking about this is so important, because, we need to be able to say to our friends, like, okay, if that relationship is making you so miserable, then maybe you shouldn't be in it. If your job is draining the life out of you and you're just done, what changes are you going to make that's actually going to positively impact that? But otherwise it's just complaining, and there's no fruit in that. There's no positivity in that. And it's just like, well, you're just staying in this rut of, my life is terrible, it's never going to get better, and I'm powerless to change everything. And there are some people that I just want to shake and be like, well, that's not true. There are all these options for you. And isn't that so wonderful that we get to make decisions for ourselves?
Absolutely. Like, a lot of people like to leave every single thing up to, well, God is going to fix this and God is going to do that, where God gave you a brain. God gave you a brain and some common sense for a reason. And so it's time to use it, and if God's or the world, God, just your circumstances are showing you that this is not a good situation for me, I'm miserable, then it's time to use the brain God gave you and get out of it.
Yeah, it's time to explore what the options actually are, because I think that sometimes we try and trick ourselves that, like, there's only one outcome here, and that leaves us helpless to everything, and so instead to like take stock of where you're at and just be like, well, this is not going well, so what is within my realm of control to actually change things, because and there are some things that we don't have control over, that's fine. You don't have to control those things. But
Yeah.
look at what you do have control over,
And if you want to change it, change
yeah,
it.
and use wisdom and steward those things wisely, you
Yeah.
know, like.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, and I've seen a lot of that, and I've seen a lot of people, you know, they think that they're gonna refuse to heal until that person apologizes to them, or they're gonna refuse to heal until that person does something different. Some people, like in our situations, we've kind of just had to accept some people will not change, no matter how many times they are confronted with issues, no matter how many times they are told how they are hurting other people, they will never change. And so you unfortunately have to kind of step away from that and do what is best for yourself and the people that you care about. And don't withhold healing from yourself because you want the other person to feel bad or apologize to you, because some people will never apologize to you. That's just what it is. And so you have to heal for yourself, because otherwise you just turn into a bitter, angry, unforgiving person. And that's something that I've observed a lot of, is people who refuse to heal just because they've never received the sorry that they're looking for, when that's just, it's not fair to you at all, and it's giving that person so much power over you still. And so if you're out of the situation, then it's time to take control over what you can control and empower yourself, and know that you have the ability to make some different choices for yourself that can put you in a better spot. So,
And, I mean, the truth is that no one else is holding you back from moving on. And
yeah.
I think that something that's really important is to have kind of two groups for yourself. You can have the things that you have no control over, like someone else's apology or the way that someone else treats you, because that's true. Like, you can't manipulate people into treating you better. That's just, it doesn't work that way. But you do have things that you do have control over. You can control how much time you spend around that person. You can control whether they have contact with you. You can control a lot of things for yourself and your own betterment. And honestly, like, that's why boundaries are so important, because it's just like, well, I'm me and you're you, and I'm going to control myself. And and that's the other thing, is that self-control is such a beautiful and powerful thing.
Yeah.
And I think that it's honestly like victimhood and self-control are opposites, because
Kind of, yeah.
yeah, because on the one hand you're saying, well, I have no control over myself because of what other people have done to me. But then on the other hand, if you are having self-control, then you're saying, well, I can't control what other people do to me, but I do get to control how I show up every day and what I'm committed to and how I'm going to act. Because to blame anyone else for your own actions, like,
It's just not, it's not being grounded in reality. It's just not. And I think that's something that is important too, like, especially as women, but I'm not even going to make it a woman thing, because it's just people in general. We rely way too heavily on our emotions and what our emotions are telling us in the moment. And I think really we would benefit from doing that a little bit less, and having some rational thought and taking a step back from our emotions in the moment, and really, like, your emotions are going to tell you that you're in pain and that you're hurt and that this is just not fair and I just don't understand why my life is this way and this is this person's fault. I've been there. I've been a crying wreck on the floor over all of this stuff before, and blaming everybody else, and, you know, just I was a wreck and I couldn't live like that anymore. And then I really had to take a step back, and thankfully I was blessed with some people in my life that point out hard truths to me, that are giving me a more rational perspective. And I've kind of learned over time that, like, if you are just making every decision based on how you're feeling, your life is not going to be very great, and it's not going to, you're not going to feel peace, you're not going to be happy, because if you make irrational emotional decisions and you just live your life based on how you feel, you're never going to feel 100%. I don't feel 100% every day.
yeah.
Who does?
Yeah.
but
I don't.
yeah, but you have to, there's a certain point where you have to take a step back and say, and just kind of give yourself the hard truth, or have people who love you give you the hard truths, and learn to think a little bit more rationally instead of relying so heavily on every single emotion you feel, because if all you do is rely on your emotion in this moment, like you're gonna just be a wreck and you're gonna be all over the place. And that's doesn't point you in the right direction of healing at all either. Like, I think it's important to really be honest with yourself again about what that looks like for you, and if you are being a little too, I guess, relying too heavily on emotions and letting your emotions dictate your life too much. And I like what you said about controlling what you can control, especially in those situations where there are certain things that are not ever going to change with certain people, and situations you will never get apologies for and stuff like that. And I definitely think we should talk about that at some point, like, you know, no contact, boundaries, like what that looks like when you're dealing with people who are abusive and will never change how they're acting. But yeah, I liked what you said about that. And yeah, I think we just all need to be a little bit real with ourselves and real with the people around us. And that's, you know, if you're dealing too with somebody who you love that's stuck in a place of victimhood, it is the loving thing to do for you to point that out in love to them. Like, I think that's underrated in our society. Is for sure. You should not enable their victimhood and their victim
Jenna,
behavior.
You're perfect the way that you
like,
are.
Nobody's perfect, and like,
that's okay.
It's
like,
okay, you know.
Yeah, and I do feel like we're both at the place where we want to be told when we're off or wrong, because we don't want to be wrong. You know? Like, it's a good thing to want to be in the right and to move towards that. And I think that's why friendships and just relationships as a whole are so important, because we can help each other get back on track and just stay the course, you know. And so like it's not a bad thing to be like, you could do better.
It is.
Okay.
It's a loving thing. If it's delivered correctly, it's a loving thing.
Yeah.
So I definitely, you know, we love all of you guys, and you can do it. You can get through whatever you're getting through, and take some time for yourself to reflect and understand, you know, your situation, and love yourself a little bit and have some compassion, and then take steps and actions towards making your life better. And you know, we're always here. Reach out to us if you need anything. And yeah, we love you all. Thank you for watching, and you have a good rest of your day.
Bye.